The dining room was absolutely still. Signora Calabrese sat at the head of the mahogany table, her weathered hands trembling around a crystal glass of red wine, and then the glass fell. It shattered against the marble floor like the sound of something breaking inside a man's chest. Her body went rigid. Her head tilted backward, and the color drained from her face like water from a broken vessel. Matteo Calabrese rose from his chair. 6'2", shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of an empire, dressed in a black suit that cost more than most people earned in a year, with dark eyes that had watched men disappear into the Hudson River without blinking. But in that moment, as his mother's body convulsed, those eyes held nothing but helplessness. His hands, which had signed execution orders without hesitation, began to shake. 12 bodyguards stood frozen along the walls. Sergio and Gino exchanged a look that held no answer. The personal physician, Dr. Marcello, dropped his medical bag and stammered something about an ambulance, about waiting, about protocols that meant nothing when a woman's lungs were closing like a fist. Then Isabella moved. She wore a borrowed dress, navy blue silk that hung slightly loose on her shoulders, and her dark hair was pulled back with a clip someone had lent her. She had $17 in her coat pocket downstairs, and that money represented everything between her and the street for the next 4 days. But Isabella Hartley did not hesitate. She dropped to her knees beside Signora Calabrese, her fingers finding the woman's collar and tearing it open with a gentleness that somehow contained fierce urgency. "Call the ambulance now," Isabella said, and her voice was not trembling. It was sharp and clear like a blade through water. "And get me something flat to elevate her legs." No one moved. "Now," she repeated, and something in that single word, something that came from a place deep inside her, from nights spent in shelters watching people die because no one knew what to do, made Matteo's men obey. She tilted Signora Calabrese's head back and began chest compressions. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm was perfect. Her palms pressed against the elderly woman's sternum with the weight of someone who had trained herself through desperation and YouTube videos watched on borrowed phones in library bathrooms. 40 compressions. Then she breathed into the woman's mouth, and the room filled with the sound of air moving through lungs that had stopped on their own. Matteo watched. He watched this woman with hollowed cheekbones and calloused hands, this woman he had met exactly 7 days ago when she'd shared her only umbrella with a boy huddled in a doorway, not knowing that boy was his son, command his penthouse with an authority that made his own men step back. She did not ask. She did not beg for permission. She acted like someone who had learned that hesitation was a luxury only the alive could afford. 1, 2, 3. The compressions continued. Sergio returned with a velvet cushion from the living room. Isabella gestured without breaking rhythm, and he placed it beneath Signora Calabrese's legs. Gino held the phone to his ear. "The ambulance would arrive in 4 minutes," he said. 3 minutes. 2. Matteo knelt beside them, and for the first time in 20 years, something cracked open in his chest like ice breaking on a frozen river. This woman, nobody, invisible, a ghost that the city had forgotten, was fighting harder for his mother's life than he was. His empire meant nothing. His power meant nothing. His name, which opened doors and closed caskets, meant absolutely nothing in this moment. Signora Calabrese gasped. Air rushed into her lungs, and her body convulsed once, violently, and then she was breathing. Her eyes fluttered. Her hands moved. The room erupted. Sirens wailed outside, growing closer. Red and blue lights flooded through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting everything in the color of emergency. Paramedics thundered up the stairs, and within seconds, oxygen masks and monitors and the businesslike competence of people trained for this moment filled the space where Isabella had created a miracle with nothing but knowledge and will. She stood. She wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, and that small gesture, so human, so exhausted, made Matteo see her clearly for the first time since she'd walked into his world. Isabella backed away from the stretcher. Her borrowed dress was wrinkled. Her hair had come loose from the clip. There was a small stain of something on her sleeve, blood, perhaps, or something else, and she looked at her hands as if they belonged to a stranger. Matteo approached her. His voice, when he spoke, was rough. "You saved her life." Isabella did not meet his eyes. "The ambulance saved her life. I just bought time." "You did more than that," he said. "You acted when my men froze. You commanded like someone who has held death in her hands before." Still, she would not look at him. "I worked in a hospital once. A long time ago. Before everything fell apart." Matteo's chest tightened. He wanted to ask her what fell apart, wanted to understand the geography of this woman's pain, but the paramedics were loading his mother onto a stretcher and carrying her toward the door. He had to follow. He had to ensure she arrived at the hospital, that the best surgeons in the city were called, that money and power did the one thing they were actually useful for, preserving life. But before he left, he turned back to Isabella. She stood alone in the center of the dining room, surrounded by the wreckage of a broken glass and the strange silence that follows a crisis. "Stay here," he said. "Please. After I take her to the hospital, I need to talk to you about who you really are and why you have not told me the truth." Isabella's eyes met his for just a moment, and in that moment, Matteo saw something that made his blood go cold. She was afraid. Not of him, but of something else, something that lived in the shadows of her life, something that had teeth and claws and knew exactly where to find her. "I will be here," she whispered. Then Matteo was gone, moving through the penthouse like a man whose world had just shifted on its axis, leaving Isabella alone with the sound of sirens fading into the distance and the certain knowledge that her life, whatever it had been before this moment, could never be the same again. 7 days earlier, the rain was relentless. November in New York City had a way of revealing the true structure of the world, the warm places where people belonged, and the cold places where they did not. Isabella Hartley had learned the difference between these two worlds so thoroughly that she could measure her life in the distance between them. She stood in the doorway of a closed restaurant, her coat pulled tight around her body, and counted the money in her pocket for the third time that morning. $17. The number was so familiar it had almost become a prayer. $17 to last until Friday, and today was Monday. That meant $4.25 per day for food, and she still needed to save $3 for the bus pass that would take her to the hospital at 6 in the morning to start her shift cleaning floors and emptying bedpans. The umbrella she carried was not hers. She had borrowed it from a woman at the shelter 3 weeks ago, and the woman had not asked for it back, which meant either she did not expect Isabella to return it or she had forgotten it existed. Isabella tried not to think about the second possibility. Forgetting meant you had something else to hold on to. She understood poverty not as the absence of money but as the absence of being remembered. The rain intensified. Fat drops that sounded like bullets against the plastic of the umbrella. She pulled her coat tighter and kept walking, her shoes held together with duct tape on the sole and a prayer on the heel, making soft splashing sounds in the puddles that had formed on the sidewalk. She had 3 jobs. The hospital shift started at 6 in the morning and ended at 3 in the afternoon. Then she walked to the diner on East 42nd Street where she worked as a bussier from 4 in the evening until midnight, clearing tables and scrubbing counters for tips that came to roughly $8 on a good night. After that, she cleaned office buildings from 1 in the morning until 4, pushing a mop across floors that no one had walked on in hours, working alongside machines that hummed with the kind of indifference that made her feel less like a person and more like part of the infrastructure. Then she went to the shelter where she and Lily slept on a cot in a room with 12 other women, some of whom talked in their sleep, some of whom did not speak at all, and one elderly woman named Patricia who had stopped eating 3 months ago and now just lay very still. The shelter director, a woman named Margaret with kind eyes that had learned not to look too closely at anything, had told Isabella that Lily could stay until she turned 8. After that, there were rules. After that, the state would need to decide what came next. Isabella had not asked what that meant. She did not have the strength to hear the answer. She turned the corner onto 5th Avenue, where the lights of the stores blazed against the darkness like false promises. Window displays showed winter coats made of materials she could not name, displayed on mannequins whose proportions seemed designed to mock anyone shaped like a real human being. She did not look at these windows anymore. She had trained her eyes to slide past them like water sliding past stone. That was when she saw the boy. He was huddled in the doorway of a closed bank, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a jacket that was clearly too big for him, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that had already learned not to expect help from the world. He was soaking wet. The kind of wet that comes from standing in the rain without protection for a very long time. His lips were starting to turn blue. Isabella stopped. Every rational part of her brain, the part that understood mathematics and scarcity and the brutal logistics of survival, told her to keep walking. She had $17. For days of food. A child to keep alive in a shelter that might take her away. She had nothing to spare, nothing to give, nothing left after the bare minimum of her own survival. She walked toward the boy anyway. "Come here," she said, and her voice was gentle in a way that sounded almost strange to her own ears, like a word in a language she had almost forgotten. The boy did not move. He was looking at her with the suspicion that children learned when they understood that kindness was often a trap. Isabella lifted her umbrella and held it over him. Not over herself. The rain began to soak into her hair, cold and endless, and she did not flinch. She had learned long ago that cold was just another kind of truth that the body had to accept. "What is your name?" she asked. "Marco," the boy said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "I am Isabella. You look like you have been standing here for a long time." He nodded, still not entirely trusting. "Where is your mother?" Isabella asked. The boy's eyes filled with tears, and he looked away. That was answer enough. Isabella did not ask again. She simply stood there, holding the umbrella over his head, and let the rain soak into her coat and her bones and the deep places inside her that had learned not to expect warmth from the world. They stood together in the darkness for perhaps 10 minutes, though time felt strange and elastic in moments like these. The boy gradually stopped shivering so violently. His breathing became more regular. He looked at her once and said, "You are getting very wet." "Yes," Isabella agreed. "I am." "You should go," he said. "You will catch cold." Isabella almost smiled. Here was a child who had nothing, freezing and alone, worried about a stranger. This was the world she lived in, where the most vulnerable people still tried to protect each other. "Will you be all right?" she asked him. The boy nodded, though they both knew he would not be all right, that standing in a doorway in November rain was not a sustainable survival strategy, that something would need to change or he would simply become another invisible person the city had decided not to see. She handed him the umbrella. "Keep it," she said. "It will help." The boy took it without fully understanding what had just happened. Isabella turned and walked away, letting the rain soak her through completely, and she did not look back because if she looked back, she would see that she had made things worse. She would see that the umbrella she had given him was the only protection she had, and now she had nothing. But what she did not know, what no one could have known on that dark November night, was that the boy's name was not Marco at all. It was Matteo. And the man who had been searching for him for 3 years, the man whose empire stretched across New York like a shadow, was watching from a black SUV parked across the street. His name was Matteo Calabrese. And in that moment, when a woman with $17 to her name gave away her only umbrella to a child in the rain, something shifted in the machinery of his world. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now, let us go back to the beginning of that day, to understand everything that led Isabella Hartley to be standing on 5th Avenue in November rain with nothing but the will to help someone else. The November wind moved through New York like a blade wrapped in ice, cutting across 5th Avenue and bending the city into submission. It was 6:19 in the morning, and Isabella Hartley had been awake for 3 hours already, though sleep had never truly come. She lay on a cot in the corner of St. Catherine's Women's Shelter, a converted church basement that smelled of industrial cleaner and broken dreams, listening to the breathing of 17 other women and trying not to move because movement meant her ribs would hurt again. Lily slept in the adjacent cot, 6 feet away but separated by a chain-link divider that was supposed to provide privacy but provided nothing at all. The girl was 7 years old with dark hair that tangled when she slept, and she clutched a drawing she had made in art therapy, purple flowers on a green stem, colors for sad days, she had explained. When she feels sad, look at this. Isabella had taped that drawing to the wall above Lily's cot. It was the only decoration in their corner of the shelter. She sat up carefully, her left side screaming. The bruises from 2 weeks ago had begun to fade from purple to yellow-green, a map of where the loan shark's men had grabbed her when she missed a payment. She pulled on the same grey sweater she wore every day, the one with a hole in the left sleeve that she had sewn shut 3 times. Her hands were shaking, not from cold but from mathematics. $17.32. That was everything she had in the world. $17.32, which needed to cover the shelter fee for another 7 nights at $23 per night, which meant she was already short by $138. The shelter gave her until Thursday to pay. Thursday was 4 days away. She had 3 jobs that paid nothing, a dead husband with $150,000 in debts attached to his name and now hers, and a loan shark named Vincent who had called her at the convenience store 3 days ago with a voice like a closed fist. 2 weeks, Isabella, he had said. 14 days. Then we stop asking nicely. She had asked what he meant by that. He had not answered. He did not need to. Isabella moved quietly through the shelter, stepping over sleeping women, and made her way to the bathroom where she washed her face with cold water and tried to look like someone who had not spent the night doing arithmetic with terror. The mirror showed her a woman who was 32 but looked older, her dark hair pulled back so tightly it hurt, her brown eyes carrying the weight of 8 months of survival. There was a scar on her left cheekbone from the last time Marcus had come home drunk, the week before the construction accident had killed him and left her with his debts and his name and nothing else. She did not cry anymore. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus 3 months ago, when she had picked up Lily from a foster home where the man of the house had begun to look at her in ways that made her small body flinch, and Isabella had made a decision that would cost her everything if she was caught. You were not allowed to keep children at the shelter unless they were your own. You were not allowed to steal a child away from state custody and hide her in a cot behind a chain-link divider. Isabella was doing it anyway. At 7:15 a.m. she left the shelter and walked 14 blocks to the Whitmore building, a glass tower where she cleaned offices for $3 an hour, no benefits, no questions asked. The building was still dark when she arrived, using the service entrance that the day shift manager always left unlocked. Her job was to empty trash cans, wipe down desks, clean the bathrooms on the 18th and 19th floors, and be gone before 6 in the morning when the real workers arrived. She worked alone in the silence, moving between empty offices like a ghost. These were the offices of lawyers and accountants and investment firms, places where people made money that Isabella could not comprehend. One office had a photograph on the desk of a family at a beach house, parents and 3 children, all of them smiling. She did not let herself look at it for more than a second. By 9 in the morning she was at the Blue Moon Diner on Amsterdam Avenue, trading her cleaning uniform for a waitress apron that was still stained from yesterday's shift. The diner smelled of grease and coffee and the particular despair of breakfast service. She moved between tables carrying plates that weighed more than hope, pouring coffee, clearing plates, smiling at people who rarely looked at her, and when her shift ended at 4 in the afternoon, her feet had conducted a symphony of pain and she had made $19 in tips. $19 that she would put toward the $17.32, reaching $36.32, which meant she was still $101 short of the shelter fee for a week, and that was before she considered food or the payment plan for the funeral home where Marcus was cremated because burial cost $3,500 and she had no money for that either. At 4:27 p.m. she clocked out and walked to Park Avenue where a convenience store had hired her 3 months ago to work the night shift, 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., stocking shelves, working the register, watching the city move through darkness. The manager, a man named Chen, did not ask questions about her past and paid her in cash at the end of each week. It was the only job that allowed her to return to the shelter by dawn. But tonight, the sky was dyeing in shades of orange and purple, and Isabella could see the clouds building in the distance. Clouds that meant rain. Rain that meant the streets would flood, that homeless people would seek shelter in doorways, that the city would reveal all the places where people like her were supposed to be invisible. She worked the register, watching the clock move toward 8 p.m., toward midnight, toward 3 a.m. when the night became very quiet and the only customers were insomniacs and people who had nowhere else to be. At 11:17 p.m. a man came in wearing an expensive coat that cost more than everything Isabella owned. He bought a bottle of water and did not look at her. At 2:34 a.m. her phone buzzed. A text from the shelter. Lily was asking for her. Lily could not sleep. The night manager had given her the phone to call. "Hi, baby," Isabella whispered, turning away from the counter. "When are you coming home?" Lily's voice was small, trembling like a candle in the wind. "Soon. I have to finish my shift. Go back to bed, sweetheart. I will be there by 7. I had a bad dream." "I know. But I am coming. Go back to sleep." She hung up and stood very still, her hands shaking again. Vincent's voice moved through her mind. 2 weeks. 14 days. At 3:33 a.m. the rain began. It started soft, then turned violent, hammering the windows of the convenience store like fists demanding entry. The streets outside turned black with water, reflecting the neon signs in shattered streaks of color. Isabella was moving between aisles, stocking instant ramen noodles that cost 99 cents each and represented a full meal for someone like her, when the door chimed. A boy walked in, soaked completely through, his clothes expensive even wet, a cashmere sweater the color of winter sky, designer jeans, shoes that cost more than Isabella's monthly rent. He could not have been more than 8 years old. He was crying silently, the way children cry when they have been terrified for so long that tears become a reflex without sound. Isabella stopped moving. She watched him walk to the back of the store and stand in front of the coolers, shaking so violently that she thought he might break. She did not know why she moved toward him. She should have stayed behind the counter. She should have called the police. She should have done what the law required and what her survival demanded, which was nothing. But she had spent 8 months learning that survival alone was a very particular kind of death, and she had spent 3 months watching Lily learn that the world was not safe, and she could not stand still. "Hey," she said, keeping her voice soft. "Are you okay?" The boy did not answer. He stared at the coolers as if they contained answers. His lips were blue. Isabella moved to the back room where the employee coat rack hung and retrieved the only umbrella in the store, a black umbrella with a metal handle, probably forgotten months ago. She also grabbed a towel from the bathroom. She brought both to the boy. "What's your name?" she asked. "Marco," he whispered. She did not know that he was lying. She did not know that his real name was Matteo Calabrese, that his father was the most dangerous man in the city, that somewhere in the darkness outside, men with guns were tearing through New York looking for him, that his disappearance had begun a cascade of violence and vengeance that would reshape everything. All she knew was that a child was cold and afraid, and she had the ability to help. She wrapped the towel around his shoulders. "What happened to you?" she asked. "Where are your parents?" "I don't know." "The men, the bodyguard." There was noise. "I ran." She knelt beside him, her knees cracking against the tile floor. "You are safe now. What is your real name?" He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much, too fast. "Marco," he repeated, and she understood that he would not tell her the truth. At 4:02 a.m., she led him to the front of the store. The rain was still hammering down. She had $17.32 to her name. She had a shift that would not end for another hour. She had a child at the shelter waiting for her, a bill due in 4 days, a loan shark counting down the remaining 11 days until everything ended. She took off her coat, the thin gray coat that was all she had against the November cold, and wrapped it around the boy's shoulders over the towel. "I can't go outside," he said. "The men are looking for me." "Then we will wait here," she said. "We will wait until someone comes for you." She held the umbrella over his head, standing in the doorway of the convenience store, watching the rain fall, and at 4:13 a.m. a black SUV pulled up to the curb, moving with purpose. 2 men in suits emerged. One of them was named Sergio, and he had been searching for this boy since the violence had erupted 6 hours earlier. When he saw the boy standing alive and unharmed, something in his face shifted. Then he saw Isabella, soaked completely through, shaking with cold, holding an umbrella over a child who was not hers. "You found him," Sergio said. His voice was deep, careful. "You stayed with him." "He was cold," Isabella said. As if that explained everything. As if that was reason enough to risk your own survival for a stranger's child. "Come with us. We will take care of you. Just take him home," Isabella said. "Make sure he is safe." She stepped back into the darkness before they could ask her name, before they could offer her money or help or anything that would require her to explain herself. She disappeared into the rain like she had always been disappearing, invisible, forgettable, the kind of person the city had decided did not matter. What she did not know was that the boy's father had been parked across the street in a different vehicle, watching the entire exchange. What she did not know was that Matteo Calabrese, a man whose power stretched across the city like a shadow, had just watched a woman with $17 to her name give away everything she had to protect a child who was not hers. And something in the machinery of his world had shifted. The penthouse was a kingdom of marble and shadow. Floor-to-ceiling windows swallowed the November rain, and 41 floors below, New York streets gleamed like wet knives. Matteo Calabrese stood motionless at the glass, studying the city that bent to his will, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Isabella Hartley's entire annual earnings. His dark hair was threading with silver at the temples. A thin scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone like a question mark that would never be answered. Behind him, Sergio and Gino waited in the kind of silence that comes only from years of loyalty and fear intertwined together. "Show me again," Matteo said. Sergio approached with a tablet. On the screen, security footage from 5 days earlier. The convenience store doorway. The rain falling like bullets. And there a woman with hollow cheeks and eyes that burned with a light Sergio had never seen before in desperate poverty. She held an umbrella over a trembling boy for 42 minutes without moving. The footage was grainy, but in one moment, just for 3 seconds, her face turned toward the camera. Matteo watched that 3 seconds on repeat. Marco. His son. His only son. "Run it again," Matteo commanded. For the 12th time that night, Sergio pressed play. The same rain. The same umbrella. The same woman who had no reason to save a child that was not hers. Matteo Calabrese had built an empire by understanding leverage, what people wanted, what they feared, how to use one to manipulate the other. He had learned this lesson at age 7, watching his father die slowly from cancer while loan sharks circled the hospital. He had learned it again at 23, when his own wife, Catherine, had been taken from a restaurant by his rivals and returned 3 days later, broken in ways that never healed. He had learned it a final time 3 weeks ago, when his brother Vincent had knelt in front of him with tears streaming down his face. Vincent had sold them to the Costello family. Matteo had not hesitated. He could not afford hesitation. 3 men were dead because of Vincent's betrayal. Marco had come within minutes of being snatched from his school. So Matteo had made the choice that any man in his position would make. He had made the choice a king must make. Vincent's body had been recovered from the Hudson River. The weight of that choice lived in Matteo's chest like a stone, and every time he looked at Marco now, he felt it settle deeper. But this woman had stood in November rain for 42 minutes and asked for nothing in return. "Find her," Matteo said quietly. "I want her name, her address, her social security number, her medical records, everything. I want to know why she did this." "Yes, sir," Sergio said, already making notes on his phone. "And Sergio, be careful. If this is a setup, if the Costello sent her." "We'll know," Gino interrupted, his voice like gravel. "We'll know within 24 hours. For days of surveillance. For days of watching a woman named Isabella Hartley move through the city like a ghost. Early morning shift at the diner on Amsterdam Avenue, washing dishes, her hands raw and peeling. Then the 2 p.m. bus to a hospital where she cleaned bathrooms for minimum wage. Then, at 11 p.m., she arrived at St. Catherine's shelter carrying a child with frightened eyes. On the 5th day, Sergio made his report. "She's clean," he said, standing in the penthouse office. "No connections to any family. No criminal history beyond an unpaid traffic ticket. She's a widow. Her husband, Marcus Hartley, died 8 months ago. He left her with approximately $150,000 in gambling debts to various loan sharks. They've been calling her daily, threatening her." Sergio paused. "She has $17 in her bank account." 17. Matteo closed his eyes. He could see her again, soaked through, shaking, refusing money from Sergio with dignity that belonged to someone entirely different from what poverty had made her. "The child," Matteo said. "The girl at the shelter. Her name is Lily. Age 7. No biological relation to Isabella. According to Sister Margaret at the shelter, Isabella pulled her from a situation 3 months ago that was," Sergio chose his words carefully, "abusive in nature. She's been hiding the girl at the shelter since then. Does Isabella have family? Anyone who could take both of them?" "No, sir. She's alone. Entirely alone." Something shifted in Matteo's expression. For 15 years, Marco and Enzo had never seen their boss show weakness. They had never seen him hesitate. But in that moment, thinking of a woman with $17 protecting a child from harm, something ancient moved in his chest. "Send 2 SUVs tomorrow morning," Matteo ordered. "Tell her." He paused, searching for words. "Tell her I want to thank her. Tell her to come to dinner." Sergio nodded and left. But Gino remained, his grey eyes watching the boss stare out at the rain. "This is not like you," Gino said quietly. "No," Matteo agreed. "It is not." The next morning, Isabella was called to the shelter's office. She moved with the careful steps of someone expecting bad news. Sister Margaret stood near the window, her expression unreadable, and beside her sat a man in an expensive suit. Sergio rose to meet Isabella's gaze. "Miss Hartley," he said, his voice gentle. "My employer would like to thank you for helping his son 5 nights ago. He would like to invite you to dinner." Isabella's hands trembled. She clasped them together. "I don't understand. I didn't do anything special. You stayed in the rain for 40 minutes with a terrified child when you could have walked away," Sergio said. "That's more than special." Isabella looked at her hands, calloused, scarred from work, spotted with permanent stains she couldn't wash away. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, "I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," Sergio said. "It's gratitude. And—" He paused, letting the moment breathe. "There's someone who wants to meet you properly." That evening, Isabella borrowed a blue dress from Sister Margaret, simple, worn at the collar, but clean. She held it together with her own fragile composure. In her purse, she carried the only treasure she possessed, a creased photograph of Marcus on their wedding day, his arm around her waist, both of them impossibly young. The black SUV hummed through rain-slicked streets. The penthouse lobby rose like the throat of some gleaming beast. Marble echoed beneath her feet. An elevator climbed silently, and then the doors opened onto a world that seemed to exist in another reality entirely. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Rain sliding down glass. The city burning with lights 40 stories below. And Matteo Calabrese standing motionless, silhouetted against the storm. When he turned toward her, the scar caught the light. His eyes were the color of winter. "Isabella," he said, and it was the first time he'd spoken her name aloud. It sounded different in his voice, heavier, more real. "I am Matteo." Before she could respond, a small blur of motion crashed into her legs. Marco, age 6, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's gentler mouth, hugged the woman who had saved him. "You're the umbrella lady. You're real." His joy was absolutely unguarded. Isabella's breath caught. She knelt down, and when she hugged him back, her eyes closed like she was holding something sacred. Matteo watched this exchange. Marco and Enzo, who had been escorting the boss since dawn, exchanged a glance that carried years of wordless communication. In 15 years, they had never seen him like this. The dinner table was set for 4. Marco chatted about school. Matteo asked Isabella about her work. She deflected with a skill born from long practice. He asked about Lily. And finally, Isabella's voice cracked. "She's not mine," she said quietly. Her foster father he was hurting her. I couldn't let her go back. So I've been hiding her at the shelter for 3 months. Matteo's jaw tightened. His hand, holding a water glass, stilled. How old is she? His voice had become something darker. 7. She draws pictures every day. Colors for sad days, she calls them. When she feels sad, she makes something colorful. And you sleep at the shelter to protect her? Yes. The rain struck the windows like 1,000 fingernails trying to get in. Matteo leaned forward, and when he spoke again, his voice was steady as stone. Why would you give your only umbrella to a stranger's child in November rain? Isabella counted to 5. She had learned to do this when emotions threatened to drown her. Because 8 months ago my husband died and left me with $150,000 in debts to men who call me every night with threats. Because I work 3 jobs and still have only $17 to my name. Because I sleep in a shelter and protect a little girl from systems that were designed to fail her. Because? Her voice broke like glass hitting concrete. Because if I stop helping people, if I stop seeing people who need help, then I become as invisible as everyone already thinks I am. The room was so quiet you could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Matteo leaned back in his chair. You're not invisible. Not to my son. Not to me. She met his eyes. Why would you help me? I'm nobody. His response came like a confession. You're the woman who saved everything I have left in this world. Harold Brennan's arrival was announced by the screech of tires in the penthouse garage. He burst through the front door at 9 p.m., his face twisted with rage that had been fermenting for weeks. He was 28, wearing wealth-like armor, his bloodshot eyes suggesting he'd spent the afternoon drinking. Uncle Matteo, he said, his voice thick and vicious. I heard you had a new pet. Matteo stood slowly. His men fell away like shadows retreating. You will leave, Matteo said. Now. Harold circled Isabella like a predator. This is the whore who saved Marco? The homeless bitch. He came close enough that she could smell alcohol and cologne, expensive and sour. You know what happened to the last person who got close to my uncle? My father. Matteo put a bullet in his head and dumped him in the Hudson River. Matteo moved with violence that was somehow contained. His hand found Harold's throat. Get out! Harold gasped, clawed at the grip, then staggered backward when Matteo released him. He laughed, a broken, desperate sound, and looked at Isabella one final time. I'll see you again, sweetheart. Real soon. After the door slammed, Isabella was shaking. But not from fear. From something harder. Something that looked like fury. Is it true? She asked. About your brother? Yes. Did he deserve it? A pause that lasted forever. He sold us to our enemies. 3 good men died. Marco was almost taken. Isabella straightened her shoulders. Then you did what you had to do. Matteo stared at her like she had suddenly revealed herself to be made of something he'd never encountered before. 2 days later, Isabella moved into the penthouse with Lily. But she kept one of her jobs at the diner. She refused to become completely dependent, refused to be owned. That refusal was the moment Matteo Calabrese understood that he had not rescued her. She had rescued him. And at the diner, watching Isabella wipe tables, Evelyn Blackwell was already planning how to destroy her. The parking garage was the color of rust and broken promises. Isabella's shift at the diner had run long, her hands pruned from 16 hours of washing dishes in water so hot it left her skin raw and red. She walked toward her car, her mind already moving through calculations. Did she have enough in her account for Lily's winter coat? Could she take one more shift at the hospital, cleaning rooms after midnight? The black Mercedes blocked her exit. Two men in charcoal suits stepped out before the engine had fully died. Their faces were blank, professional, the kind of blank that comes from years of doing things that require no emotion. Isabella's breath caught. She knew this look. She had seen it in the eyes of social workers, landlords, men with power and no mercy. Isabella Hartley. The voice came from behind her. She turned. Harold Brennan stood against a concrete pillar, rain dripping from his expensive coat. He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 45, with the soft face of a man who had never worked a day in his life. His eyes were rimmed red from drinking, and when he smiled, she saw something that made her skin go cold. He looked exactly like Matteo, except where Matteo's face held intelligence and control, Harold's face held only cruelty, wearing a mask that was slipping. "You know who I am?" he asked. Isabella did not answer. "My uncle tells you about my father." "Harold." One of the men stepped closer. Isabella took a step back. Her car was 15 feet away. The garage was empty except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of rain on the concrete levels above. "My father was a good man," Harold said, moving toward her with the slow confidence of someone who had never been told no. "Strong man. Built an empire." "And my uncle?" "He murdered him. Put a bullet in his skull and dropped him in the Hudson River like garbage." Harold's voice was conversational, almost friendly, which somehow made it worse. "You know why?" Isabella's back hit the cold concrete pillar. She had nowhere left to go. "Because my father wanted what my uncle had. That's the game we play, sweetheart. We take. We keep taking until someone stronger takes from us." Harold was close now, close enough that she could smell the alcohol and cologne mixing into something sour and thick. "And my uncle took something from me. He took my father. So I'm going to take something from him." He reached out and grabbed her throat. The pressure was sudden and absolute, like a hand closing around her windpipe. She gasped, her fingers clawing at his wrist. The world tilted. Her vision blurred at the edges. "You're going to help me," Harold whispered, his breath hot against her face. "You're going to go to the police. You're going to tell them my uncle forced you to live with him. That he threatened you. That is holding that little girl hostage. You're going to destroy him, or I'm going to make sure Lily disappears into the system so deep, so dark, that you'll never find her again. I have judges. I have social workers. I have cops who eat from my hand." He released her. She gasped, coughing, her hand at her neck. "Do we have an understanding?" "No." The word came out as barely a whisper, but it came out. Harold's hand flew. His palm connected with her face so hard her vision exploded into white light. The second blow came to her stomach. The third tore at the back of her shirt. The old scars across her spine and shoulders, 8 years of them, a map of hell drawn in flesh from her first marriage to Marcus, before she had the courage to leave, were suddenly exposed to the cold garage air. Harold laughed. A broken, desperate sound that echoed off the concrete. He pulled out his phone. Click. 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 "Oh, this is perfect," he whispered. "Damaged goods. My uncle's charity case. His purchased conscience." He stepped back, admiring the photos on his screen. "You refuse me again, these go everywhere. Every newspaper, every website, every social media account in New York. Everyone will know what you are. And when they see these scars, when they read what you really are." Matteo's embarrassment. His mistake. He left her there, crumpled on the concrete floor like something broken and discarded. Isabella sat in the dark for 20 minutes. The rain hammered on the garage levels above, a distant percussion that sounded like the world ending. She could not stop shaking. Oil and exhaust hung in the stale air. The fluorescent lights buzzed with the sound of electricity dying slowly, never quite finishing the job. Her phone was in her pocket. She pulled it out with hands that would not obey her. She scrolled through her contacts until she found it, a number she had saved 3 years ago during her darkest nights, after Marcus had died and the bills had come and she had sat in a bathroom for 6 hours thinking about endings. Her finger hovered over the call button. Then she heard it. Lily's laugh. Small, bright, pure, echoing down from the penthouse levels above. The sound of her daughter playing with Marco, safe and warm and alive because Isabella Hartley had been brave enough to share an umbrella one night in the rain. One small sound. One child's joy. Isabella's hand steadied. She stood. She wiped her face. And she made a different call. Sergio, she said, her voice shaking but solid. I need to speak to Matteo. Right now. And I need to tell him everything. 2 hours later, Isabella stood in Matteo Calabrese's office in the penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the glittering city spread below like diamonds scattered on black silk. She turned her back to him and removed her shirt. The silence that followed was absolute. 8 years of scars. Thick and thin, running in every direction like a map of every man who had ever believed he owned her. Her shoulders trembled as she stood naked under the soft light. When Matteo spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. He touched you. Yes. He threatened Lily. Yes. He dies tonight. Isabella turned to face him, her eyes fierce. No. Not death. Too quick, too easy, too merciful. You want to destroy him? Do it right. Do it so he feels every second of what he tried to do to me. Matteo stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. He picked up the phone on his desk. He made 3 calls. At 2:17 a.m., 12 men in black tactical gear moved through Harold Brennan's penthouse apartment like ghosts. They breached every door simultaneously. The sound of weapons being raised filled the darkness like thunder. Harold woke with a gun barrel against his temple. Matteo Calabrese sat in a leather chair beside the bed, perfectly composed, watching as realization crawled across Harold's face. Red laser sights painted his bare chest. The armed men stood silent, breathing in unison, waiting for the word that would end him. You threatened someone under my protection, Matteo said, his voice conversational, which was somehow worse than rage. You touched a child who is not yours to touch. You think because your father was my blood that you have rights. Harold's body betrayed him. Urine darkened the expensive Egyptian cotton sheets. The photos, Matteo said. Show me. Harold's hands shook as he unlocked his phone and deleted them one by one. The trash folder was emptied. The evidence of his cruelty dissolved into digital nothing. The FBI has been building a case against your family's operations for 6 months, Matteo continued. Money laundering. Trafficking. Tax evasion. They received all of it 30 minutes ago. Federal agents will arrive at dawn. You are looking at a minimum 40-year sentence. Harold collapsed, trembling like a cornered animal. I'm family, I'm family. You stop being family the moment you put your hands on her. 2 federal agents entered from the hall where they had been waiting. They cuffed Harold while he screamed, dragging him down the hallway in nothing but his underwear, his voice raw and desperate. You'll regret this. I'll destroy you. I'll come back. Matteo's voice followed him into the darkness. No. You won't. You're erased. When you get out in 40 years, if you get out, no one will remember your name. The next morning, Evelyn Blackwell stood in the Plaza Hotel ballroom wearing a dress that cost more than Isabella Hartley's annual salary. 300 of New York's elite filled the tables, champagne flute sparkling in the light of crystal chandeliers. She was giving her annual charity speech when Matteo entered. Isabella walked beside him, her head held high, wearing a simple black dress that somehow commanded more attention than any of the diamonds in the room. Evelyn's smile froze. Matteo took the microphone. I would like to announce a $500,000 donation to St. Catherine's Shelter, he said, his voice filling the ballroom. in the name of Isabella Hartley. A woman of extraordinary courage and character. A woman who will never be invisible again. The applause was confused, uncertain. Then he played the recording. Evelyn's voice filled the ballroom, laughing with Harold about destroying the homeless trash. Plotting. Planning. Strategizing Isabella's complete destruction. Evelyn's face went white. I've also forwarded documentation to the IRS, Matteo continued, his tone never changing, regarding fraudulent charitable foundations and unreported income. Federal agents should be arriving momentarily. Evelyn ran. Every exit had an agent waiting. She was arrested in front of 300 witnesses, her screams echoing through the ballroom like the death cry of something monstrous and finally defeated. Isabella watched it all from Matteo's side, her hand steady in his, her eyes clear. Both villains handled. Both dragged away screaming. Both erased from existence, not through death, but through something far more complete, the systematic destruction of everything they had built. Vengeance tastes like justice. 2 months after Harold Brennan's screams faded into the federal prison transport van, Isabella Hartley sat at the penthouse kitchen table with her shoes off and textbooks spread across the marble surface like forgotten children. Organic chemistry. American history. Introduction to business management. Her laptop glowed at 11:22 p.m., the cursor blinking in an essay about financial systems that had once seemed impossibly complicated. Now she wrote about them like someone translating her own survival into theory. Matteo stood in the doorway watching her work. She didn't know he was there, her eyes were locked on the screen, one hand tucked under her chin, the other typing with the kind of focus that only comes from someone who has learned that education is not a luxury but a weapon against invisibility. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft percussion of her fingers on keys. Marco and Lily sat at the far end of the table, homework completed an hour ago, now drawing together. The boy, Matteo's nephew, his heir, showed the girl how to shade shadows. She showed him how to make eyes that actually looked alive. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that only happens between children who have learned to trust each other's presence. You should sleep, Matteo said finally, his voice breaking the quiet like a stone through glass. Isabella jumped. Her hand flew to her chest. You move like a ghost. Occupational habit. He came around the table and looked at her essay. The title was Predatory Lending and the Invisibility Economics of Poverty. His eye scanned the first paragraph. This is good. This is very good. It's due in 4 days. She saved the document obsessively, she had lost too much to trust digital memory alone. Professor says it could be published in the university journal. If it's strong enough. It will be strong enough. He said this like it was already fact, already decided, already written into the architecture of the world. Isabella had stopped working the 3 jobs 6 weeks after Harold's arrest. The $17 in her pocket had multiplied into actual stability. There was a salary from her foundation work now. A foundation that had started as Matteo's $500,000 donation in her name at the Plaza Hotel, but which she had built herself, with her own hands, using her own vision. The House of Hope. A shelter that wasn't just a warehouse for the invisible, it was a place where women learned their own value. She looked at Matteo now, really looked at him. He wore an open-collar white shirt, his sleeves rolled to the elbows. The scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone was more visible in the kitchen light. There was grey at his temples that hadn't been there when they first met in the November rain. He was only 42, but power had aged him like it ages everyone, from the inside out. Did you eat? She asked. Later. I wanted to check on Marco first. He finished his homework 3 hours ago. He's been drawing with Lily. Matteo's eyes found his nephew. The boy was absorbed in showing the girl how to hold the pencil at the correct angle for texture. His left arm, the one that was supposed to stay permanently paralyzed, that the doctor said would never move again, guided the pencil with full control. The recovery had been slow. Miraculous. Therapy 3 times a week, Matteo hiring the best neurologist in the Eastern Hemisphere, but mostly it was the boy's own stubborn refusal to accept the diagnosis of permanent damage. And now, 6 months later, full mobility in both arms. He played basketball with other boys his age. He would start high school in the fall. He's better, Matteo said quietly. Because he has something to work toward. Because he's loved. Isabella closed her laptop. Because you didn't let him disappear into the medical charts. Matteo pulled out a chair and Saturday. The leather creaked under his weight. I need to ask you something. And I need you to answer honestly, not out of gratitude or obligation, but out of what you actually want. Isabella's stomach tightened. The careful wall she had built in the past 6 months suddenly felt thin. Okay. In my will, I'm naming you as Marco's legal guardian if anything happens to me. But that's only if you want it. If you want him. The sentence hung in the air like something suspended between water and air. I'm not asking because of what happened. I'm not asking because I feel like I owe you something. I'm asking because, he paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was different. Lower. Because in 15 years of building an empire, of commanding men, of making impossible decisions, I have never seen anyone choose to stay in the rain for a child they didn't know. You stayed for 40 minutes. You were freezing. And you never even told me about it. My mother had to tell me. You just did it because it was right. Isabella felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, cracking. Like a seed splitting to let something grow. I stay when people need me, she said quietly. That's not nobility. That's just who I am. I know. That's why I'm asking. He looked at his hands. At the scars on his knuckles from 30 years of doing terrible things to people who deserved it. I want Marco to grow up knowing someone like you. Not me. Not power. You. Kindness as a practice. Courage as a daily choice. If something happened to you. It won't. I've made arrangements. I've stepped back from the street operations. Everything's legitimate now. But if it did, I need to know he'd be with you. Isabella reached across the table and took his hand. She had never done this before, initiated touch with Matteo Calabrese. He went very still. Yes, she said. Of course yes. But nothing's going to happen to you. You can't know that. I can know that if you keep making choices like this, like staying with your sister when she was sick, like protecting me from Harold, like rebuilding your business into something that doesn't require blood on the floor, then you're going to live a long time. And Marco will remember that his uncle chose differently. That's better than a legal document. Matteo's thumb moved against her palm. Just barely. Just enough that she felt it. They stayed like that for a long moment. The kitchen humming around them. Marco and Lily still drawing. The rain beginning again outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, November rain, the same cold that had brought them together 1 year ago. 8 months later, Isabella had graduated. Bachelor's degree in business with a minor in social justice. The ceremony was held at the university auditorium. Matteo sat in the front row wearing a suit that cost more than the entire tuition she had paid herself. Marco and Lily cheered when her name was called. Sister Margaret from St. Catherine sat next to them, tears streaming down her face. The House of Hope was now operating in 5 boroughs of New York. 43 women had completed the program. 31 had found permanent housing. 14 had started college. 7 had reclaimed custody of children. The foundation's budget was $3.2 million annually, and it was growing. Isabella had started a second initiative too, a fund for legal defense of domestic abuse survivors. It covered court fees, lawyer costs, the expenses of starting over. In the past year alone, it had helped 22 women file protective orders. 17 of those women were alive today because the fund had made their escape possible. At 6 months after Harold's arrest, Isabella had given a speech at a shelter in Red Hook. She wore a dress with a low back, and for the first time in her life, she let people see the scars. They ran across her shoulders like a map of survival. The women in the audience, 73 of them, sitting on folding chairs in a church basement, saw those marks and understood in a way words could never convey, survival was possible. Breaking free was possible. You could be damaged and still become whole. Now, 1 year after the umbrella, Isabella stood on the balcony of her own penthouse. Not Matteo's building. Her own space 3 blocks away, purchased with her foundation salary, decorated by her own hands. The November rain fell again, painting the city in rivers of neon and reflected light. 23 stories below, yellow cabs moved like blood cells through the arteries of the city. Steam rose from subway vents. The sound of distant sirens and honking horns created a kind of urban heartbeat. She heard the elevator ding before she heard the door open. She had given Matteo a key 6 months ago. He used it when he knew she would be alone, when he came to talk about Marco or the foundation or simply to sit in her presence for a while. Neither of them had spoken aloud the thing that had been building between them like a slow fire. But she knew. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. The way his hand lingered when he helped her with her coat. The way he had started coming to her apartment every evening, like she was magnetic, like proximity to her was the only place he could rest. His footsteps approached the balcony. She didn't turn around. "A year ago you had $17 and an umbrella," he said. Isabella smiled faintly. "And you had everything except peace." "I still don't have peace." He came to stand beside her, both of them looking out at the city spread before them like a map of everything they had survived. "Every night for a year I've thought about that moment in the rain. You could have walked past my son. You could have given him the umbrella and left. Instead you stayed, freezing, for 40 minutes with a stranger's child because it was right." The rain intensified. It drummed against the glass barrier of the balcony like fingers asking for entry. "I've commanded armies, built empires, made men disappear with a word," Matteo continued, his voice steady. "But I couldn't do what you did. I couldn't see past my own power to act with simple human kindness." Isabella turned to face him. "You did when it mattered. You protected me from Harold. You chose justice over revenge. You taught me that. You taught me that power means nothing without someone willing to share an umbrella in the rain." He reached for her hand. The first time he had touched her with intention beyond safety. His hand was warm and scarred and trembling slightly. "I've carried this truth for a year, Isabella. I was afraid to speak it because I didn't want to trap you, didn't want you to feel obligated. But you're free now. You've rebuilt yourself. And I need to say this before another year passes." His voice dropped to almost a whisper, "I love you. Not because you saved my son, though I'll be grateful for that until I die. But because you showed me what strength really looks like. It's not power. It's staying in the rain when you have every reason to walk away." Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I fell in love with you the night your mother collapsed and you let yourself be helpless in front of me. The most powerful man in the city, on his knees, human. That's when I knew." They kissed as rain fell around them, the city glittering below like scattered diamonds, two people who had found each other in the storm and decided to stay. 6 months later, Isabella and Matteo stood together at St. Catherine's shelter, handing Sister Margaret a check for the new women's wing. The number on the check was $800,000. The wing would have safe rooms, counseling centers, a medical clinic, and classrooms. It would have her name on the entrance, the Isabella Hartley Memorial Healing Center. Memorial not to death, but to resurrection. Lily and Marco played in the background, chasing each other down the hallway with the reckless joy of children who knew they were safe. Sergio and Gino stood watching their boss smile, genuinely smile, for the first time in 20 years. The umbrella hung framed on Isabella's office wall at the House of Hope, weathered and fragile, preserved under glass. The plaque beneath it read, "Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest storms of change. Family is not always bound by blood, but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives." If this story moved your heart, please hit that like button. Share it with someone you love, someone who needs to hear that their kindness matters, that their invisible acts of courage are being seen. Subscribe to this channel because tomorrow we have another story about love, power, and the courage to be kind when the world goes cold. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time someone showed you unexpected kindness when you needed it most. Tell us about a moment when you stayed in the rain for someone, even when you could have walked away. We read every single comment, and your stories matter. Remember this, you never know whose life you might change with one simple act of compassion. A $17 umbrella became a foundation. A moment of human kindness became a family. After the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the end. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.